Nigga, please. Hi, this is Kendra with Trust TV, and I'm back with another video. I gotta go play this video back again of this black man exposing
didn't know how to do those intricate braids. It wasn't until on these
until
old
the
photos
Africans
of black
came.
Americans.
This
I
video was
noticed a
erased
lot
from
of
my
them
phone.
never have those intricate braids that we see today. If they have braids, it's like one or two. Jenny has a few braids here. I never really see it how Alicia Keys used to do hers, or how Doechie's is. Like, looks complicated. Looks like it took a long time. Like, not anybody could do the braids like that. Like, I never see that in these old photos. Even after enslavement, you're not really seeing photos of their hair in braids. Like, I'm going through this book. I really recommend it if you want to see
and look
Black
how
American.
They say Rappahannock County. These were the American Indians, y'all.
Really all kinds of looks, but no braids. You could say they were shamed out of braiding, or they were conforming with the white standard, but a lot of Black American grandmothers didn't know how to do those intricate braids. It wasn't until later, when the Africans came. Where are the photos?
Thank you. Do you not hear what he just said? Makes perfectly good sense what he said, because in the interview, Muhammad Ali talked about how he was not able to go into a restaurant being a Negro, but the Africans being African were allowed to eat in a white restaurant, but him as a Negro couldn't. And so Muhammad Ali goes, what's the difference between a Negro and an African? Exactly. A Negro is a reclassified Indian to Negro, color, and black in the 1924 Racial Integrity Act. That's the difference. And these elaborate braiding hairstyle was appropriated and emulated into black society when Africans came to the Americas somewhere around the time of maybe the 1950s, 1940s. But prior to that, no sir, no, there was no Africans here. Not in America, there wasn't. And I want to say, if you truly believe you're African, think of it like this. If they saying they got you from sub-Saharan Africa, make that make sense. Because how would you know how to pick tobacco and farm fruits, vegetables, cultivate the land, of which they had you on? They had you cultivating the land. Farmers, black farmers, blah, 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 right? How can they never tell you about any Native American or Europeans teaching African slaves how to plant? You never see that at all, right? Because what you could read about in history, and what Martin Luther King said, is that they undergird white, these so-called Slavic people that call themselves European, right? Which are not, right? Because they were Slavic before they were ever European. And the Iberians, Africans, and Arabics, and some of the English used to have these Slavic people as slaves. They were not at all called European, Irish, Scottish, none of that. They was not called none of those names. They switched those names to change their social status from being peasants. Okay, they switched and stole, burned down, and pillaged cities and states in America, and stole the identity of the original brown-skinned Scottish, Irish, Portuguese, Spanish, French, and so forth, and Europeans. And that's how they became European, after they changed everybody's identity and gave themselves a social status and thievery, all those races. Because if you read Benjamin Franklin Book of Mankind, it will let you know that all those people were brown-skinned folk from Scotland, Europe, Irish, Germany, and so forth and so on. So just to give you context, if you believe that you're African, then explain how you would learn who taught the Africans how to cultivate the land, when Native Americans, it is not alleged, literally you can read about their Native American schools, they taught them how to farm. They taught them how to farm. Wouldn't American Indian already know how to farm? It's their land. They would already know how to cultivate it. Why would American Indians have to go to school and be taught how to farm their own land from foreigners who wouldn't even know how? And we know that back in the early 14, 15, 16, 1700s, a lot of these Spaniards, Europeans, and Portuguese who came over here, who were brown skinned, they were dying of starvation because they did not know how to cultivate the lands in America. Even though Europe has some of the same weather as the Americas, even then they were dying of starvation because they did not know how to cultivate the lands. So who would have taught these so-called black people how to farm when white people, who are now claiming to be Europeans, Martin Luther King literally stated that these white people were undergirding white peasants with an economic flaw by giving them land county grants and giving them county agents to teach them how to mechanize farms, teach them how to plant, teach them how to cultivate the lands. So if they had to be taught in the 1960s how to cultivate the land, how to farm and stuff, who taught the Africans in the 1600s? Who taught these Africans? They didn't have no Africans. They didn't get no Africans. The American black people are the aboriginals of America, because the land in Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, given the fact that sub-Saharan Africa is where they claim they got us from, that gets too much sun exposure. So in order for, it would be hard to plant a vineyard in Africa. It would be hard in sub-Saharan Africa to be able to pick cotton because there's too much sunlight. It would burn all that stuff up in sub-Saharan Africa. So you would have to understand the science to farming tobacco, sugarcane, different fruits and vegetables of the Americas. And we know that black people owned 3 million acres around all America of farmland, and we knew how to cultivate the land. Well, who taught us back in so-called slavery time if the white people in the 1900s didn't even know how to farm and had to be given county agents to help them? And then the so-called these Mongols who call themselves Native American, they had to go to an Indian school to learn how to cultivate the land. So who taught these alleged Africans then? Right. So that should let you know without a shadow of a doubt that the American black people are the aboriginals to the Americas, just based on that and every other evidence that substantiate that fact. Now, what he is talking about is the hairstyles. He's right. These hairstyles were not brought to us until the 1900s, when Africans were now introduced into the Americas, right? Now, we copied not from white Europeans, because white Europeans weren't called Europeans at that time. They were Slavic people. I'd read an article a while ago and made a video of this young white girl, so-called white, who said the word Slavic derived from my people. She was a Slavic so-called white woman, right? Because we know that there was a caste system. Everybody understand caste system had nothing to do with hue of complexion. You could be peasant and dirt poor and consider black, okay, but have white hue of complexion. You could be be as dark as night and consider white because of your wealth. It was a social status. And it wasn't until the 1920s that white people made it, after Reconstruction, turned it into a social structure and a racial structure. That's when they started these racial lines to make it seem like they had wealth by calling and taking the names and the identity of brown-skinned European, Spanish, Irish, Scottish, French, American Indian who were wealthy in America, taking their names, lynching them, stealing their properties, and then saying that the reason why they called themselves white is because they were white skinned. No, that was just that law was just implemented in the 1920s. People were calling themselves white in the 1700s, not because their skin was white, but because they were wealthy. Okay, that's what people don't tell you. And also the hairstyles that black people did in the 1800s, the American Indians were influenced by the brown-skinned Europeans. I will show you pictures of the Europeans who wore their hair in these, nobody wore box braids. I will show you even of the American Indian and what was said about them and what they wore. We know that, I'll just show you, better not could tell you. Right? We got the Olmecs Indians. They used to wear locks. Everybody know they used to wear locks. They wear afros. They wear their hair out, all right? These are the depictions of Indians. Like I said, if you want to know where some of these oil paintings come from, I'll show you. All right, so this is in Gatzberg, Mondolf, Aim Castle in Germany, a depiction of American Indians in the 1700s. Right, and there go Africa. America, Africa, right? So that's where you can find out where to get some of these oil paint. All right, so these are some of the Europeans, the so-called black folk, right? These are the Europeans that ruled in Europe, right? That's how they wore their hair. No braids. They just wore their hair. Up and updos. The black royals, I know they try to call them African, but y'all know that's bull. You gotta prove that. Just again, I talk about brown skin was some of the oldest skin in the world. Having brown skin is older than having white skin. So every nation would have had brown skin. Doesn't mean that they're all from the same place. Excuse me. As Japanese people and Chinese people people don't consider them the same. It's the same way American Negro and Africans aren't the same, as we already talked about that with the story of Muhammad Ali, when he said, what is the difference between the Negro and the African? So here are Black Moors of Spain in 1711 and 1492, and I told you these elaborate hairstyles and the way black women, if you could see at the beginning in the other man's video, and this is for educational purpose only, so this is why we use in his video. Again, you could forget they try to tell us we African and all that stupid stuff, but we know the truth. We know we're not African. All right, and this is just crests. And why would you put a slave with a crest on your family's crest? Make that make sense. This is a French crest. It's a woman is French. Okay, and it just shows you the elaborate hairstyles that were the Europeans. This is in Haiti, but we got these from the French people. The Europeans wore their hair like this. This is also their style of dress. And when a lot of these tribes would ally with these French, European, so forth, for them to be able to survive, we would take on some of their culture, right? You would marry into that family. If you were from a different tribe, you would marry into that culture, and you would implement some of their culture and some of yours, things like that, if that makes sense, right? We don't want to see that woman putting on her clothes, y'all. Right? This is how some of these Europeans dressed. This is not white people stuff, as they want you to believe, because again, they were not considered Europeans. They were considered Slavics. Okay? Let's go back. That Madam C.J. Walker, that was allegedly during the time of slavery. She made her own hair grease that helped grow black hair, right? And again, the style of hair had nothing to do with white people. There again, she's a black European. How she wore her hair. Okay. How they dressed when they came from Europe. Look at the waves in her hair. We know our hair get wavy like this. All right? And you just showing you black folk and how we wore our hair. This is all from Europeans, right? This is how the Europeans wore their hair and their clothes. Okay? And not white folk, because again, they were not considered Europeans. They're not their original European anyway. They'd be like, they peons or whatever. I know for one thing, they were a Slavic nation first. That I know for certain. Two things for true. Now, I don't profess to know everything, but I know so. But I know for one thing for certain, two things for true. They were definitely Slavic, coming from Austria and the Ukraine. Okay. Allegedly an African slave, Harriet Tubman. Where them elaborate hair braids? Where they at? She ain't wearing none. This allegedly Harriet Tubman. Why she ain't wearing them African braids, y'all? No braids in sight. And let me show you this photo right here, because they'll make you think she owned her. But what if I tell you that old white lady also a slave? They sold white slaves, and she's a mixed race child. They saying daughter of a Nola's woman, enslaved child. We don't know that. This is conjecture. All right, they gave you not conjecture. This is conceptual art. You don't know who anything is. Okay, in this photo, she's wearing all black. She's wearing nothing that symbolizes that she has any wealth, this white lady. None. What on her looks wealthy? Look at this. She's wearing a dress under a dress. Where's their wealth? The little black girl is in a flowered, embroidered dress. So people will make you think, oh, the black little girl's a peasant because she's not wearing a... You don't know that. This white woman could very well be a slave. And remember, they were slaves. So don't let conceptual art fool you. Because that's all that is. Look at it. They try to make you think this little white baby is owns this black woman. Look at this black woman. Does she look owned? She got a brooch on her neck. Jewelry. Who would give a brooch like that to a poor peasant slave? Stop it. She owned the white baby. She put the clothes on the white baby. She bought that orphan trained baby. She's the mammy of the baby. She bought it as a slave, a servant. These children are slaves, y'all. The black lady bought them. Hold on. Again, here go a king, a black king, Europe, and see just his curls, how he curled his hair. So a lot of this way that we style our hair was from black Europeans who dressed like that. And we got a lot of the way we wore our clothes once they acclimated themselves into our culture. And we assimilated ourselves into the black Spanish, Portuguese, Scottish, Irish, French, and European cultures. They were all brown skin folk. And when they would acclimate themselves into society, and them as American Indians, we just made a melting pot of cultures, got together and built civilizations together. That's what happened in America. All this wealth, all these inventions was from us, right? It was not from a white or a Slavic, a so-called white person. Was not from Asians, Mongols of any sort. It was nothing but various shades of brown, so-called black people in the Americas. Here goes some books. Again, you could just go. I'm just going through it to show y'all, how our presence was in every country, and even in the Americas, and where we got our hairstyles from, and how we wore our hair. Look, this is the Oklahoma school, black Indian students, teacher. See, these black Indians, and look at these little Mongols and white kids who got grafted into our schools to do what? Learn from us how to be an American Indian. Learn from us our cultures. And then they would, after that, betray us and take our lands in these Dawes rolls, one drop rule and blood quantum, where these so-called Native Americans, these Chino slaves, were, after they in the 1700s became indigenous vassals of the Spanish royal crown because they were good Asian slaves, and then they allowed, in order to get their freedom, they were considered indigenous vassal of the royal crown by the Spanish queen, and that's how they gained their citizenship and would work their 7 years and not be slaves no more. And that's how. And then they, after once white people, the Slavics came, the Chino slaves conspired with the Slavic whites to steal the identity of all the wealthy black folk and take the land. And that's when you come up with Dawes Roll, blood quantum, and all that stuff. That was to get the land from under, and all these lynchings and burning and all that stuff. It was to get the land from the black folk. Look at this. Yes, historically, many boarding schools for Native American children, also known as Indian schools, taught boys to farm as ways to assimilate them into American culture. Why would a Native American not be already assimilated into American culture? Why? They are the culture. Wouldn't they be the culture? They're a Native American. They're supposed to be American Indian. Would they not already know how to farm? Would they not already know how to farm? Do you hear me? Y'all reading what I'm reading. These Native Americans are fakes. So teaching white people to farm is a topic that touches on history of segregation. They never want to give you nothing straight up. Agricultural education in the United States, specifically the existence of separate programs for white and black farmers, right, during the Jim Crow era, right, this Jim Crow era, while Future Farmers of America, which is all white people funded, New Farmers of America eventually merged in 1965, which goes back to what Martin Luther King said when he said undergirding white peasants with an economic flaw by giving them land county grants, giving them money so that they're able to buy farms that were stolen from black people, right, and then giving them county agents, black people, to help them to mechanize them farms in 1965. So if they had to learn how to cultivate and farm the land, that means that they couldn't have taught no African how to cultivate no lands in no early 14, 15, 16, 1700s, because they themselves didn't know how to farm until 1960s. Stop playing with me. Without a shadow of a doubt, lest you know, the Aboriginals of America, who is already here, are the Negroes, just by knowing that. We already saw where them so-called Native Americans had to go to school to learn how to farm. Now we see that the white folk, based on what Martin Luther King was saying, they had to learn how to farm. So who taught the Africans how to farm? Because the soil in Virginia, South Carolina, New York, and Philadelphia, New Jersey, New Mexico, Ohio, Florida is not the same as sub-Saharan Africa. I'm done and I digress. This is Kendra with True Us TV, y'all. Make sure y'all like, y'all share, and y'all subscribe, because this is insane how in this year, allegedly 2025, we are still believing that we're African. You got to be crazy. Okay, peace out, y'all. Stay up, stay blessed again. Put God first above all else. Peace out. Bye.